The Canadians, they're here. Do you think Kyle Nelson drinks maple syrup before the fights like we do?
I hope not, because that was an awful experience, I must say.
It really was, but coming up this weekend, we have the monster Kyle Nelson taking on El Animal. It is Blake Bilder representing Sub Fighter and Old Fuego Boxing down there in California. For Bilder, a CFFC champ and a really turning into a great pro at a bit of a later age. I mean, he's in his early 30s. He's not in his early 20s. But he's really seemed to put everything together, and we saw that in his performance down in Australia his last time out against smoking Shane Young out of New Zealand. And in that one,
how was his gas tank, Craig?
It was pretty darn good.
It was really good.
It was really good. It surprised me a lot because for Bilder, you kind of saw him make that progression with CFFC. He takes on a short notice opponent in his first title fight over there against Frank Buenafuente, who went from fighting on the prelims to a title shot. And he got dropped in that fight, and then he rallied back.
That was a beautiful submission, though.
Then Bilder's next time out, he fights Carvalho, and he gets dropped not once, but twice. And then he rallies back and he wins. So then he takes on TriStars, Alex Morgan, a guy who I'm going to reference later on in these fights. And in that matchup, Blake Bilder goes out there, has some success. He's able to slip a shot, and then he ends up jumping onto the back of Alex Morgan after he has him rocked. He gets the submission win. Dana White says, I don't hire 32-year-olds, but ultimately, Bilder ends up in the UFC. And against Shane Young, it wasn't one hit, one kill wrestling, or jiu-jitsu, or striking, but we got to see a little bit of a progression of the skills of a guy like Blake Bilder.
And that was really nice to see, because you knew that he did have sort of the individual skill sets, but it was a matter of, hey, can he finally put it all together? And like you said, guys in 32 normally don't keep on progressing, right? Like, you're a finished product, and we'll just kind of see where you go from this point on. But for Bilder, it does seem like he is continuing to grow fight after fight, and that's an exciting thing, too, because if he is able to grow, even based on the last performance against Shane Young, then he might be able to make himself into... Josh Emmett's a pretty good example, right? Like, Josh Emmett was able to go on a big run in his 30s, right? He wasn't really this known commodity. He thought about retiring multiple times before he made it to the UFC, and then he hit on this run after getting these crazy knockouts. I'm not saying Bilder's going to get to the level of the division like a Josh Emmett, but still, there's guys out there who kind of progress later on in life, and I do think Bilder could be one of those fighters. And for Kyle Nelson, it's just been such a weird run, right? Like, every Kyle Nelson fight, he'll look kind of okay, the pressure might be there, the boxing combinations, he'll get hit a lot, which isn't phenomenal, and that's the thing about both these guys.
Both of these guys, and I have it in my notes, funny fight because both guys' faults are similar. They've shown wobbly moments in fights, but more often than not, they withstand adversity and overcome.
That's why this fight does remind me a little bit of the opening fight on the card between Belbita and Oliveira, because it really does come down to whoever's moving forward, because if Bilder has Nelson up against the cage, I like him to strike in combination, I like him to threaten with the takedown too, and like you mentioned with Bilder, he's a really talented back taker. That's what he's looking for in a lot of these grappling situations. He'll threaten with the armbar, he'll look for different positions, but a lot of it is to try to open up you kind of getting to your base. He can take the back, and from that position, I mean, he has rear naked choke finishes. He has good ground and pound too when he is able to get in that top spot, but the thing is, that might be the hardest way to beat a guy like Kyle Nelson, right? Like, if Blake Bilder goes out there, hits him with a few big shots and knocks him out, that's one thing, but if Bilder goes and tries to out-wrestle him, he could find himself getting fatigued, and we could see Kyle Nelson kind of fighting himself into this one.
Well, when we talk about Kyle Nelson representing House of Champions, he's cornered Diana Belbita in the past in the UFC. He's also got Mike Malott training out of that gym, who's taking on Adam Fugitt later on this card. And if you look at it for a guy like Kyle Nelson, I mean, overall, also training with St. John, New Brunswick's own Christian Savoy. So pretty cool over there. But if you look at a guy like Nelson, it's bringing the boxing together. You saw him on 2 days' notice fight up a weight class against Carlos Diego Ferreira, and he loses in the strike, and he gets taken down in the first round and ground out. And then in the second round, he gets finished. He takes on Matt Sales, and I know you said that if, you know, this fight's going to come down to whoever pressures. Sales completely outstruck Nelson on the outside by backing around and just turning, because Nelson doesn't necessarily do a great job at cutting the cage. He keeps his hands really high. He moves in kind of spooky like that. And he throws a lot of really big, like, hooks and punches from distance to try and close the distance, where his foot position isn't the biggest thing for Kyle Nelson. And that's where he can get peppered with a lot of counters. So he has struggled in those moments. He did finish Kama Worthy. That was an interesting fight. Or, sorry, Polo Reyes.
Polo Reyes got finished by everybody.
He hit him with so many shots in that flurry. And that one was in Mexico, so a big win for Kyle Nelson there. He then goes on to lose a couple in a row. One to Billy Quarantillo, that's forgivable. One to Jai Herbert, where Nelson started out really strong in the first round with the leg kicks. His boxing looked good, and then slowed down round 2, round 3. And his last time out against Doo Ho Choi, It's a weird one because just about everybody scored at 29-27 Choi, because Choi lost the point in the third round, just like Muin Gafurov did last weekend, except Choi, from in tight, on top in the third, ducks down, and his head clashed with Kyle Nelson's head, and War Tyone goes, no, I'm not War Tyone in this. Nah, you're losing a point for that headbutt. I thought it was a little crazy. Ultimately, it ends up as a draw because two of the judges scored at 28-28 and one 29-27. But for Kyle Nelson, now you're in a weird spot because Nelson in the fight against Choi excelled in his wrestling in the third round. I know I just said Choi was on top and landed the headbutt. It's true, but Nelson was winning the third, losing the first and losing the second, in my own view, I guess. I mean, in that second round, obviously the round was scored for Nelson by two of the judges, but I disagree a little bit. But when you look at a matchup like this, I think Bilder can have some success in the wrestling. I think he can have some success in the striking, but that right hand to Kyle Nelson, or even both of those hooks, those could cause Bilder issues. The right hand's been an issue for Bilder to try and see it around his guard. So I'll be eager to see what we get out of Bilder in this one. This is first time up in Canada. He mentioned that in an interview.
You hate it though when a guy's best chance to win is when he's talking like a 1920s boxer. This big right hand though. Like, if that's what you're relying on, I do think the volume of Bilder, and you bring it up. Yes, I agree with you. Nelson can get countered because he doesn't really cut off the cage well. But still, if you're Blake Bilder, you'd much rather be moving forward in this matchup, I would say, than moving backwards. Because it still does give Nelson the opportunity to land one of those big hooks if he is able to bob and weave his way through some of those combinations.
Yeah, I mean, Bilder did say in an interview with Combat Sports UK and James Lynch, he said, going to 10th Planet quite a bit with everybody. The open mats, so you never know what actual jiu-jitsu rank they are in a gi. And he said 15 rounds, 6 minutes straight with 30 seconds in between. And he feels like the Terminator, so that's kind of scary. Bilder is a big favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 75% Bilder.
I'll say over.
It's just Kyle Nelson's 1 of 4
it has
with a draw in the UFC. It's 94% of 822 total votes going with Bilder, 41% by decision, 40% by submission for the 6% that have Nelson, 43% by decision, 39% by knockout. I do have Bilder in the matchup, but getting knocked down and almost out by fighters that are no sniff close to the UFC, it obviously does scare quite a bit. I will go with Bilder because I like that progression that I saw. Even with the 20-hour flight and the jet lag that he had going to Australia, I still like Bilder in the matchup here.
I also have Bilder in this fight. I was really impressed by the volume in his last fight against Shane Young. That really stood out to me because he was able to strike forwards and backwards, and I think that's going to really be the key in this matchup against Nelson. So both of us going with Blake Bilder.
Both of us going with Bilder, who has a closer flight to Vancouver than Kyle Nelson does out of Ontario. An interesting fight coming up. And listen, when we're talking about the featherweights, they're on fire. You got a title fight not so far away with Rodriguez taking on Volkanovski. In the co-main event of this card, Matt, you got Charles Oliveira taking on Beneil Dariush at lightweight. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.